call this Ordinance Committee meeting to order, considering ordinance amendments relating to water pollution prevention, protection of watercourses, city storm drain system, and water use. May we have a roll call vote?
Councilmember Gutierrez.
Here.
Councilmember Rouse. Here. Madam Chair Snedden.
Here. Thank you. And do we have any public comment for items not on the agenda?
We do not.
Okay, thank you. With that, we'll invite staff report.
Good afternoon, Ordinance Committee. I'm Adam Hendel, Principal Engineer in the Public Works Department. I'm here today to lead a presentation of a couple different departments regarding protection of water courses. I have Cameron Benson here to talk about some of the water quality aspects of this, and then Madeline Wood regarding some of the water conservation aspects of this. And I'll just kind of go through and do an introduction, and then we'll go right into the content of the revisions we're making here. So first off, the purpose of the ordinance is to revise the municipal code to move Chapter 16.15 regarding water pollution controls to Title 14, which is sewers and storm drain systems, and then to make some clarifications. That's what kind of initiated this ordinance amendment coming out of creeks. And then we're also adding to and clarifying protection of water courses and connections to the city storm drain system. That's more a public works element. And then making some minor revisions regarding water waste and irrigation meter requirements, water conservation. So just to re-summarize, this is a list of some of the departments that are impacted by these revisions. Public Works Permitting, myself, Creeks Water Quality, Water Conservation, and then Public Works Street Operations get heavily involved regarding the city storm drain system. And then lastly, Building and Safety regarding on-site grading permits and some other enforcement issues. So first off, I just wanted to go over some photographs of what a watercourse can be. A watercourse is generally a path that surface water takes to get downstream. So water goes from the mountains to the ocean. And the photo on the left here is Mission Creek after the Mason Street Bridge project. Not only is that a watercourse, but it's also a regulated floodway. And then the photo on the right is a much smaller watercourse that's not a floodway, but it's still the conveyance of water from one point downstream. It just gives you a couple of examples of some watercourses. And here are a few more photographs. Watercourses don't have to be natural. They can be natural or they can be engineered. The photo on the left appears to be an engineered or a designed conveyance of water, and the photo on the right is just a natural ditch, basically, that conveys surface water. So in your packet are the revisions to the ordinance and the revisions to the municipal code. One element of this chapter that's really important is the definition of a watercourse. And this is the text from the ordinance, and I'll just read this. A watercourse means a stream, creek, arroyo, gulch, wash, or swale that is tributary to any waters of the state or that conveys surface water during or after storms to the city storm drain system and the beds thereof, whether dry or containing water. Now, what is not a watercourse? So a watercourse is not an erosional feature, a rill, swale, ditch that is not tributary or wetlands and do not convey surface water off the owner's property. Those are generally excluded from the definition of a watercourse, which means if somebody has a little rain garden on their own property, then it doesn't qualify as a watercourse. Some more definitions. Waters of the state is defined, as is the city storm drain system, which can be everything from the city street to the storm drain pipes, drop inlets, etc. And that's what gets regulated under the city's stormwater permit is the city storm drain system. That's what we're responsible for. And with that, I'll pass it over to Cameron.
Good afternoon. The city's water pollution prevention requirements outline what may and may not enter the city storm drain system and water courses. As Adam mentioned, basically what we're doing today is just clarifying and cleaning up our municipal code with regard to surface water pollution and wastewater pollution. So the ordinance update relocates our water pollution prevention rules from Title 16, which deals with wastewater spills and leaks, to Title 14, which governs the storm drain system and the water courses. One of the reasons for this is that the storm drain system and the sanitary sewer system are physically separate entities from each other. Those two regulatory worlds use different types of terminology, and they operate under totally different Clean Water Act permits with the State Water Board. So it makes sense to separate them out and provide more clarity for the public as well as for our enforcement. And then also this update is designed to ensure continued compliance with both of those NPDES Clean Water Act permits for wastewater as well as surface water pollution.
So going in a little bit more detail on some of the Public Works permitting aspects of this is permits required from Public Works for any physical connection to a city's storm drain system. So that means if a private development is connecting to a drop inlet out in our street, catch basin, or a pipe underground, or if they're connecting a curb outlet drain from a roof drain, daylights out the curb face, that also requires a permit from Public Works. And then other drainages within city or county easements. So we have some natural water courses that there's a city or county flood control easement. You'd also need a permit to connect to one of those water courses. And on the next slide, I'll go in a little bit more detail about why we need a permit for connecting to the city storm drain system. Another aspect of this ordinance change is prohibiting filling in natural water courses with pipes. So if you have a large water course that conveys water from one property to another, generally both for environmental preservation and good civil engineering practice, it's not a good idea to infill a natural water course with a pipe. Because in the event that the pipe fails, then you can have neighborhood flooding and those types of issues. And Cameron could go into a little bit more aspects of the environmental preservation component of that, why we don't want to infill them for habitat reasons. If you have questions on that. Okay. So again, the city storm drain permits, they're necessary both for water quality, to meet water quality requirements, and then to ensure they're constructed in compliance with our standards. We want to make sure that any connection to our drop inlets or our pipes are properly built. And then we need to review the capacity of the pipe to ensure that there's enough, that the pipe is the right diameter to convey that water. And modifications must continue to provide for historic discharges from upstream properties and not concentrate surface water or damage downstream properties. That's an important part. Water's going to go downhill, and we have to make sure that when we modify that course of the water, we don't damage any downstream users. And with that, I'll pass it over to Madeline.
Chair Sneddon, members of the committee, Madeline Wood, Water Conservation Supervisor, and I'll be talking you through a couple of the modifications for the definition of waste of water and irrigation meters. So the city has had a prohibition on water waste since 1989. The definition of waste has changed over time to include excessive or unnecessary use of water, significant property runoff, and failure to repair leaks in a timely manner. Today, what we are proposing to modify is to add to the definition of waste the failure to repair leaks within 72 hours after notification by the city. This would replace the phrasing of as soon as reasonably possible and gives a specific time period. The other modification is to add that irrigation during and 48 hours after measurable rainfall is wasteful. This is something that we had prohibited during the drought as part of a drought regulation, and as of April it was lifted. These proposed modifications are required for compliance with the city's MS4 general stormwater permit and are also good practices for efficient water use. The proposed modifications for separate irrigation meter requirements affect multi-unit residential, commercial, and mixed-use projects. For single-family residential projects, they fall into a different category of thresholds, and those requirements will remain the same. So currently, an irrigation meter is required if the project includes 1,000 square feet or more of landscaping. The proposed modifications would increase this trigger to 5,000 square feet for projects that would not otherwise be installing new or modifying existing water services. The 1,000 square foot trigger would remain in place for projects that are modifying their water services in the right-of-way. This will remove a hurdle for smaller landscape retrofit projects that were not planning to change their water service and their water meters in the right-of-way in their scope of work. And keep in mind that projects will still abide by our landscape design standards for water efficiency for the landscape palette and the irrigation.
Okay, so just to wrap up the presentation here, the Ordinance Committee recommendation today is to forward this municipal code amendment to the City Council for introduction and subsequent adoption, and we're here to answer any questions you may have.
Do any committee members have questions, or should I? I have a couple questions. Okay. So one question, big picture-wise, with the drainage and how it might change from one property to another. And so an example of, especially in the hillsides there, you have one property that has dispersed drainage and then makes a change to have it funneled into a pipe, say, to go into an existing waterway on a lower property. How does that change with these changes? Does that has to be then permitted, and who's doing the calculations for whether that's a suitable amount of water or not?
Chair Sneddon, the answer to that question is likely in that scenario there's a building permit requirement, some kind of gradings occurring on the property, a new residence, something like that, at which point they would need to submit building permit plans for review by the city, and those would be reviewed by building and safety and public works staff. And that's where the watercourse definition comes in. That's important because the revisions to the municipal code define the watercourse, and then it provides for what's necessary in order to modify the watercourse. You need to demonstrate that you are conveying that equivalent capacity and that you're not creating these issues for your neighboring properties. And so there's a process in the municipal code for that as part of the amendment.
I suppose that's my question is, that it's an equivalent amount and that it's going to the lower property. I mean, I just know these issues come up a lot, right? Like somebody does some grading or even gets a permit for it, and then the water drainage is different on the properties below. And so what are the changes here that would be affecting that process?
Honorable Chair, members of the committee, there really are no changes here that would affect that process. What we've done in this ordinance is to cross-reference existing provisions in Title 22, which deal with essentially grading permits, the building permit for grading. All of those kinds of things are evaluated in the context of land development. What we've done here is continued the existing prohibitions on doing things like increasing the runoff into a natural watercourse, increasing the runoff into a drain, blocking a drain, doing things that would cause water to back uphill and flood somebody else. You know, the whole idea of this is, as Adam indicated, water wants to go where water wants to go, and that's downhill, and we got to make sure that the downhill owner does not receive an additional burden as a result of uphill development. Likewise, uphill development cannot block drainage that would further go uphill or run around the property to flood others. And that's all handled already in Title 22. We're not changing any of that.
Okay, very good. Thank you. And I had another question about the 72 hours versus as soon as reasonably possible. I'm a little concerned about it being too tight of a timeline. If you could share with us why the 72 hours, and I'm imagining maybe a week might be necessary. Is there a threshold on how big the leak is?
So Chair Sneddon, that's directly from the MS4 permit as a requirement. The way that we implement our enforcement is as long as you're addressing the issue, you aren't receiving subsequent violations, and the first one has no fine, it's just a warning. So as long as you're working on it, we recently had a deep underground leak, and they had plumbers and leak detection out every day, so they weren't in violation because they were trying to find it. So even though it took longer than 72 hours, they just received a warning.
Thank you. That was my question, that it wasn't a change from that. Are there any other questions from committee? No? Do we have public comment on this item? None? Okay. This is too easy. I will say, we're now.
I'm just gonna move
we're
staff
now ready
recommendation.
okay. So a motion, do we have a second?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Any discussion? No. I just want to say I appreciate the thoroughness to tying these back together with the cross references and the attention to cleaning up the language and full support of that. So I think with that, we'll take a roll call vote.
Councilmember Rouse. Councilmember Gutierrez.
Yes.
Madam Chair Sneddon.
Yes,
Thank you.
thank you. We are adjourned.
Thank you.
Yeah.